Hello, and welcome to Decarbonize, the Clean Energy Podcast from Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is a Minnesota nonprofit working to speed our state's transition to a clean energy economy. My name is Isaac Quam, and I'm the Director of Communications here at Fresh, and I'm also your host today. I'm excited to be joined by my colleague Eric Fowler, who is our Director of Building Performance. Thanks for coming on the show, Eric. Are you ready to talk about building affordability?
Absolutely. Thanks, Isaac. I am glad to be here.
Eric, you wrote an in-depth two-part blog series this summer about building affordability. And before we get into the importance of building codes and how we can make our homes more efficient and affordable, I want to start with the personal story that you opened with in the series. So you live in an older home and you were a bit shocked to get an $820 utility bill for gas and electricity in your home this February. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So it was just barely over $820. And I like you said, I am in an old household. So so there are reasons why it was so high. Because at the time they were not building energy efficiency in from the get-go, which is the easiest, most affordable time to do it. We have basically no insulation. It honestly could have been a lot higher. We keep our thermostat between 63 and 65 degrees in the winter. Um,
I'm also a
and
cold weather winter dweller. I love keeping it pretty cold. I don't do it as much for energy reasons as much as comfort, but like that does have an impact on your energy bill. So even yours is set lower.
Yes. Yeah, and that makes a huge impact. So again, if we were setting it at 70, we would. I mean, I haven't actually done the math, but like that could have easily been $1,000. I wouldn't be shocked. Um, and I think you know there's kind of there's the way that I connect this to the codes work is um, obviously it is important to invest in programs that are doing uh, weatherization work and deep energy retrofits in existing buildings, which is most of them. But the other lesson is, again, like I said, my home, they didn't do that from the start. And so now any retrofit that we do on an existing building, um, it's a lot more costly, invasive, time intensive to go back and try to improve the efficiency of a building later. And so when we raise the floor of what is required by our energy code in terms of efficiency, in the form of insulation, air sealing, other envelope requirements, as well as the mechanical systems. um, it makes a huge difference to just do it really well from the start, and then have those benefits into the long run. And like, my household has the privilege to be able to pay the bill we got in February. But um, for a lot of people in Minnesota and across the country, that could have been a life-changing bill. In 2025, over one-third of US households skipped or cut back on medication, food, or other necessities to pay an energy bill. We also know that a quarter were unable to pay an energy bill in full. And we also know that there are millions of utility service shutoffs across the country every year. In 2024, it was a little over 2.5 million uh, folks who had their utilities shut off for non-payment. So keeping those energy bills affordable is obviously hugely important.
Yeah, I think a lot of Minnesotans know that, the way that your house is built, you literally pay for the decisions that were made when it was built, right? If it was built to be really energy efficient, you're probably have lower utility bills every month. That really helps you month to month. If your home was not built that well, you have much higher bills. And that's really where the building code comes into all this, because how we build our buildings in Minnesota has a huge impact on the affordability of them, the bills that Minnesotans pay every month. And it also has a big impact on our emissions in the state. If we can build our buildings to be more efficient, we can help to reduce emissions in Minnesota. For our kind of next part of the conversation, there's this myth in the buildings world that wrongly spreads this message that making our building codes to be more strict and requiring homes to be more energy efficient will make them more expensive to build. But we know that that's not necessarily true, and that stricter building codes can actually lead to cost savings for a lot of families. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of noise about this right now, thanks in large part to actually a pretty, I mean, it's not a large number of companies who are really driving this argument, but they are very large. So there are some large home building companies that are trying to blame energy codes for the affordability crisis. Um, which couldn't be farther from the truth. And I'm excited to talk about both like some research and evidence as well as the concepts. And I think so. I'll start with that. And we have the benefit. I'll share an anecdote that comes from some of the work of our colleague Sam, who's on staff here at Fresh Energy. Uh, there are thousands of different ways to build a roof, a wall assembly, and thousands of different ways to build a home, obviously. And some of those methods are actually both cheaper and more energy efficient in the resulting product. And some of the reasons for that is one, insulation is cheaper than mechanical upgrades, right? So when we put a little more into that building envelope, which is the separation between the indoors and the outdoors, when we invest more in that, it reduces what we call the heating and cooling load, which is just to say like the demand, Um, so by doing that, not only is the end user going to save on their utility bills, but actually the builder or developer is going to save on the mechanical systems because now they can put in a smaller heat pump, maybe furnace if they're putting that in. They will be able to downsize that equipment. Another reason is that you can, by spacing out studs using advanced framing techniques, spacing them out in the exterior walls to be 24 inches apart, and then using 2x8s or maybe even 2x10s, that does a number of things that can be really helpful. One is you actually can get away with like fewer studs, which is helpful, which also means a little bit less labor in the construction. And now we have bigger cavities to put that cavity insulation, which is just the, you know, technical term we use for that insulation that is, between the studs within your wall. Um, and also by having fewer studs, we are reducing the number of thermal bridges. Sorry, I don't know if I checked in on like how technical to get, but we're just going at it with the
We're going
terms.
right into the building terms, and I think most folks that listen to this will appreciate the technicality. If folks don't know what a thermal bridge is, how would you describe that in like one sentence for folks that might not know?
a thermal bridge is like anti-insulation. I mean, that's that's a very simplified way of putting it, but it is something that is going to conduct heat transfer a lot more than the insulation that is in the rest of the wall, right? So if you take a thermal camera and look at a wall during maybe like a really hot summer day or a really cold winter day, um, if all you have is cavity insulation, if you just have the insulation between the studs, then in all likelihood, you're going to be able to see those studs because they will appear warmer or cooler than the insulation around it because they are transferring heat between the indoors and the outdoors a lot more than the insulation.
The way I think about it is if you've ever been in an older house in Minnesota in the winter, if you put your hand on the cold wall in the winter, if you're putting it on a stud, it probably feels a little colder because that stud is touching the inside wall and the outside wall. And so there's more of that cold coming in. Whereas if you move your hand to the right or left and it's over the cavity where the insulation is, it will be a little warmer because you have that insulation. And so the thermal bridge is kind of where the studs are and the energy, whether it's hot or cold, can pass through. And so having fewer thermal bridges in your house can make it more energy efficient. And so when we're talking about building codes, there's all these little small adjustments that you can make to make a home more energy efficient that can also end up being cheaper to, fewer materials or less labor, which makes it both more efficient and more affordable for homeowners.
Exactly. I might have to try that method. I mean, in theory, it's sound, but now I want to know, can I find the studs by the temperature differential? Um, so one other way that we see savings when building more efficiently from the start is is if you can eliminate one of the utility hookups. If you know, even now, I don't know if people realize how far we've come, but we're at the point where gas is becoming optional, even in a cold climate like Minnesota, because of high performance construction and really amazing cold climate heat pumps that are going to provide the vast majority of your heating throughout the year. And if you can get away with, one fewer hookup, that can potentially be a lot of savings. How much savings is going to, your mileage may vary, but it's probably fairly significant. One study estimated nationally that all electric new construction would save about 5%. Another kind of put the range as like $1,800 to $10,000 saved per home, which, so that gives you a sense of like how wide the range is. But really, really ballpark around $5,000 maybe of savings that you might be able to realize by going all electric because it is really efficient and because the heat pumps have come so far.
Will you talk a little bit about so Sam, who leads our buildings team here at Fresh Energy, has also built a lot of homes previously to working at Fresh Energy. And he collaborated with Habitat for Humanity up in Cohasset, Minnesota, to work on an all-electric cold weather home that he built affordably. Can you talk a little bit about why this was such a great case study of kind of showing that Minnesota, not only can we have all electric homes in our cold weather state, but you can also build them to be all electric for the same price or even cheaper than a home that uses, gas.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is where some of those concepts we were just talking about go into practice. And yeah, so Sam Friesen was a home builder before joining us here at Fresh Energy, and And then, did consulting with Itasca County Habitat on this home that is, we're calling it like a 2038 home because the way that our energy code in Minnesota, the way it's going is that we are going to be at what I call near zero by 2038. So these are super efficient homes. And the goal working up there in Cohasset was to see, can we build that already right now? And what they found with, this is habitat that is to some extent relying on volunteer labor, and yet building to this much higher standard than the current code, they found that they were able to do it at cost parity for their standard builds. Uh, and and one of the other huge benefits, I think we'll probably talk about the some of the health benefits later, but while we're on the topic, one member of the family has asthma, and moving from a home with gas, and we know that combustion indoors, especially at the stove, is hugely impactful on human health. And we're just learning like how dramatic that impact is. It feels like more and more every day. That family now has seen the symptoms of the asthma sufferer have improved a bunch, and they are now spending less on medical treatment, which is like another way of saving costs when your home is healthier.
I just saw a recent study that came out of Ohio. I don't know if I've shared this with you, Eric, that there's a study done in Ohio that found that replacing your gas stove with an electric stove can help asthmatics as much as medication can. And so, like, for folks that live in a home with a gas stove, you would be surprised at how much better your air quality is and your asthma is if you can just replace to all electric. So not only it does how we build our homes matter for affordability and for emission goals, but it also has a big impact on human health as well. You mentioned some additional evidence with this. Is there other research you can talk about this issue?
Absolutely. So and I'm really glad you brought up that study. It is very impactful. Um, Another one, and so neither of these studies, the one you just mentioned and the one I'm about to mention, neither of these made it into the blog. They weren't out yet. The two-parter that we're basing this episode on. So this is new content, but researchers in June, researchers from the University of Alabama released a study where they asked whether housing prices change with building codes. And the short answer is no, there was no cost increase. And furthermore, there was no impact on the supply, which is one of the other claims that gets thrown out, is that, oh, well, you're going to make building too expensive, and then you're also going to suppress the supply of housing. So to look at the costs, they examined 45 different instances of raising raising the code in a jurisdiction, of adopting a new code, and they looked at 26 states from 2011 through 2022, and the thing they found was that price changes were not statistically significant. Actually, well, the authors did note that when they found a little bit of a price change following a code update, the home prices were actually more likely to be decreases, and that the decreases in price were greater than the increases when they did happen. this is kind of buried down at the bottom. The high level is that they did not find anything statistically significant. Um, but uh, yeah, I mean that that was very rigorously studied. Um, the other the other piece that they looked at was this question of supply, and they compared border counties where one jurisdiction updated the code and the other one didn't, and they wanted to see, does construction move from one county to a neighboring county um, where the code didn't change, and they found very little fluctuation in the rate of construction, and what fluctuation they did find didn't even coincide with the code updates. So their takeaway is that codes do a lot of good. They were looking at the full residential code. So that includes all the energy and safety and comfort and health benefits of the energy code, as well as the construction and mechanical code and elements that are also going to make homes more resilient to extreme weather events, for example.
This all kind of reminds me of, it seems like, you know, making a more strict energy code to make our homes more affordable and more efficient seems like a no-brainer. It seems like one of those things that every homeowner would want to have, because who would want to pay higher bills or have a, dirtier, more polluting energy source in your home? And you just shared this study that talks about how we know that, strict codes can actually bring costs down. But across America, a lot of housing costs are rising. And so if it's not the energy code that's doing it, what are the cost drivers that you're seeing that are raising the cost of home ownership?
Yeah, there's actually a ton, and the ironic thing is that the energy codes are actually one of the very few regulations on construction that make buildings more affordable, because it it requires a one-time upfront investment that may or may not, because of everything we've been talking about, like that upfront investment may or may not actually be very costly at all compared to how you would have done it. And then in exchange for that one-time investment, you have permanently lower operating costs. So, what are the drivers of high housing costs? Besides high energy bills, some of the things that we look at are interest rates, our land value, insurance, tariffs on materials. I also think um, this is already a problem, and this has been a growing problem is labor shortages, whether that is from lack of investment in employment and training, or policies that drive workers out of the labor force or out of the country. We can also look at zoning restrictions, and there are conversations happening about trying to make some improvements there in Minnesota. And then there's things like, luxury finishes or complex or oversized houses. And then surprises, which is just like businesses typically like predictability. And, that is part of our, that's part of why we like the energy code trajectory that has a pretty clear path of where we're going by 2038. And, um, that way you are not getting uh, surprised by where we're going because we are laying it out from the start.
A lot of these cost drivers that you bring up too is kind of interesting because we're talking about buildings today through a lens of climate and climate change in Minnesota too. And it's what's interesting is the feedback loops that climate change has already created with some of these drivers. And so I'm thinking about insurance premiums. And as the climate crisis kicks in, it's created this feedback loop where natural disasters become more destructive and more frequent, which causes more damage to property, which then means that insurance companies have to charge higher premiums to cover the new normal of damages we pay. And I know this is a whole topic for a different day, but I think it's an important way to show that our how important it is to address the burning of fossil fuels because the longer we wait to, reduce emissions in the building sector or to kick the can down the road on making a stricter building code really has a really big impact, not only on climate emissions, but on our livelihoods, on our affordability, and everyday decisions we make about our well-being. And so I think that's kind of why it's so important that as we're talking about climate change and inflation and home ownership costs, um, it's important to keep these things in mind and how climate plays an impact with that. Another thing we're seeing rising gas and electricity prices nationally. How do those rising costs affect homeownership costs?
Yeah, I that is a really good question. I want to answer that. I also want to touch on something that you just mentioned about the insurance kind of trajectory that we're on, and this is I think this is a great time to point out that one of the strong benefits of keeping our codes, not just our energy codes, but all of our code books that dictate, the minimum construction requirements, and what should resiliency against hail or fire or other issues like that. What should that look like? And this is, I think, a good time to point out that having up to date codes is a really important lever for both mitigating climate change and slowing down our emissions, and for adapting to climate change, right? Our having strong up to date codes really helps with both of those things in pretty important ways. So yeah, so I wanted to throw that in there, um, and then in terms of the rising costs of energy, that's huge, and that is a reason to continue investing in efficiency. So in 2023, Fannie Mae found that non-mortgage related housing costs comprise roughly half of the total cost of ownership for mortgage borrowers, which is the folks who, mortgage borrowers basically means the folks for whom affordability would be a concern. Like, if you are plopping down a pile of cash and buying a house, then I am less concerned about your ability to afford everything else.
Right.
So really, we're like for everyone that we're talking about right now, who has a mortgage on a home and is paying for it over time, uh, the utilities piece of that budget is really important. And Fannie Mae found that utilities edged out both insurance and taxes as the number one non-mortgage housing cost. Now, as we've been saying, insurance rates are going up a lot with the impacts of climate change. So, like, I would I would watch this space. I think when they next redo those numbers, maybe insurance will come out on top because we've seen a lot of change in that area. Um, but yeah, utilities already a huge part of the affordability puzzle, and then a growing part. We looked at so in February when my household got this bill, we looked at the consumer price index and uh, found that there was a nearly 5% increase in electricity prices and an almost 11% increase in natural gas prices over the previous 12 months nationally. So, you know, a thing I like to point out to folks is that the affordability numbers, so the official kind of cost savings calculations for energy codes get done at Pacific Northwest National Lab. And so, for example, the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, which is the most recent energy code that PNNL studied at a state level, specifically looking at Minnesota. It's not the one that we're moving to, but it is the most recent one where they crunched the numbers specifically for Minnesota. And they found that going to the 2021 IECC would add between $121 and $192 per year to a 30-year mortgage. Well, how much would it reduce energy bills by? They found that the energy savings would be between $220 and $376 annually. So the energy savings more than make up for any additional construction cost. And when they calculate those, that doesn't necessarily account for the volatility of prices as they continue to rise. Like they make some assumption that costs will go up, but whenever energy costs go up more than the PNNL math geeks expected, the cost benefit ratio of codes only gets better and better the more those energy prices go up, because that just means that you are saving that much more. So, having strong codes are critical to housing affordability, and they're also one of the things that we can control at the state level. Like we just talked about, a number of other factors that are huge, like tariffs, interest rates, global fuel prices. Unfortunately, those are kind of out of our hands at the state and local level, but better codes, which we can implement, save money and make us more resilient to disasters, and also keep us healthier.
So we've been talking a lot about building codes and affordability, how they affect our finances, the long-term, kind of financial impacts that they have on homeowners. But there's a lot more to buildings than just finances. We also can think about health and well-being too. And so you've written a lot about how building a better building envelope in your home can change everything about the home, not just the bill. Can you walk me through the other benefits of having a more efficient home?
Yeah, I get really excited about this. So when you have a better building envelope, basically everything about the building is better, right? Like, why do we go indoors? To be not outdoors. And when you have better air sealing, or in other words, air tightness and better insulation, all you're doing is building a better barrier between you and the outdoors, which is why we build. So one of the big benefits is comfort. Like when you have you know excellent insulation and air sealing, you are not going to have drafts. You are not going to have these rooms where one room is 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 degrees different from another room in the house, because of drafts coming in, or because it happens to be farther down the line on your duct system, and so it's not getting enough, and the heat that it is getting is just like leaking out there at the end. We also we also see huge benefits to noise reduction and sound insulation, and you know, um, depending on the source and the volume. I mean, noise is a pollutant, and uh, this is like one of those sleeper benefits. But I remember touring a an affordable housing development in Northfield that was really near to a highway. You couldn't hear a thing when you were inside because um, the Venn diagram between sound insulation and thermal insulation is not quite a circle, but it's pretty close to a circle. So if you have if you're well insulated and air sealed, you're going to mostly keep out the noise as well. Uh, we also see benefits to smoke and allergen intrusion. Friends from the passive house movement I think that's where the term smoke tight comes from, which is this concept that as wildfires become kind of the new normal. I mean, I don't think I ever realized how much wildfire smoke we would be living with on a regular basis here in Minnesota. And yeah, this is just another example of why it is good to keep the indoors in and the outdoors out. Is it gives you control over smoke, and then finally the um, the airtightness of the wall is actually really helpful for reducing moisture and mold risk. Um, Air intrusion through a wall is actually the number one way that moisture gets delivered into wall cavities. And if it can't dry, that's when you start to have problems. So, you know, uh, we are the phrase that we are going towards is build tight, ventilate right, um, and if somebody is telling you that a house needs to breathe, that is very outdated, and they might be trying to sell you a substandard wall.
I think those are a lot of benefits of having a more efficient home. So we talked about comfort, sound insulation, but your point about wildfire smoke is maybe closer to folks' mind from this summer. We had a pretty bad bout of air quality from the wildfires up in the Boundary Waters. I was actually on PTO when that was happening, and every year me and my family go to a old lake resort near Park Rapids, and we stay in these three-season cabins, and there's no HVAC. You just open the windows, and it was so top of mind for us because you immediately can tell when the air quality is not great because it's in your home and it starts affecting your well-being, your coughing. I don't need to go into all the health impacts of that, but I think it really does bring home the point I was bringing up before about how, as climate change is changing what our normal is, our buildings both mitigate and adapt. And so not only do we need more efficient homes to reduce, the impacts of climate change, but also building it to be more efficient means you can be healthier in a world where climate change is making wildfires and smoke happen more and higher numbers and more often. And this kind of ties to another area I wanted to go to. You've talked about in the blog series hours of safety, and this is about how long you can be safe in your home in extreme weather or like when your power goes out, etc. What can you tell me about hours of safety?
Yeah, I love this concept because I think it makes more tangible an idea that um, I've talked about for a while. I certainly didn't come up with it, but there's a concept in sustainable buildings around passive survivability, which is to say, without without utilities or without external support, like how how survivable, how livable is the building going to be for at least some period of time, and ideally longer is better, right? That's kind of nebulous. Um, so a thing I really like about this concept of hours of safety, it is a framework for comparing different buildings and getting really specific about how long we can expect them to maintain safe indoor temperatures under extreme conditions during a power outage. And we can look at hours of safety both from a cooling, summer perspective, as well as a heating season winter perspective. But the thing I think it drives home is the fact that the energy code is a life safety code because extreme temperatures are deadly. And in fact, I mean, extreme heat is becoming increasingly up there on, I guess natural. Is it is it natural? Natural causes of death in the country. So uh, so there's this really there's a good paper. It's from a little while ago, but put out by RMI, and they one of the reasons I like it is because they looked at different construction types in Duluth and compared. They said, okay, if we look at a winter power outage in Duluth, how many hours could you expect the indoor temperature to stay above 40 degrees Fahrenheit? 40 degrees is a kind of threshold for when you start to go from uncomfortable to unsafe. And they found that a code compliant 2009 home, which is a little lower than our current code in Minnesota, but fairly close, that would give you 45 hours of safety compared to a certified passive house, which is close to where we're going. It's a little beyond where we're going in 2038, but the certified passive house provided over triple the hours of safety at 152. And they didn't crunch the numbers for summer hours of safety, but I think that is an area that deserves more attention. Is the fact that when we invest in a really excellent building envelope, it 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 is actually a matter of safety and well-being, and not, I mean, it is comfort, and comfort is important, but it's about more than just comfort.
And I think it's not just about power outages too. This also has a big impact on if you still have a furnace or if you switch to a heat pump. Another way to think about it too is if that malfunctions and goes out, suddenly you really care about how long your house can stay comfortable. And that's where that hours of safety really come into play. Last winter, when we had a cold snap in December, I still have an old gas furnace and it went out. And pretty quickly, my main problem was not just that my furnace was out, but that my home wasn't comfortable. And I was really having to find someone that could come out and fix it quickly and get it up and running because in Minnesota's cold winters, obviously, how warm your home is very quickly becomes a very serious problem. Um, and pretty interesting that the study you talked about came out of Duluth. I think Duluth is a great example because it gets really cold in Duluth. So, like, it's a great place to study how this actually truly matters.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, and I think the so we we want to give due air time to the health and safety benefits um, of this efficiency, but this concept is also really important and really helpful for the grid. Hours of safety is sort of like one way to apply an idea about energy storage. Like, how how long can you go uh, between how long can you go between kind of like power inputs? That's maybe a weird way of saying that, but I the way I think about this is that I think people know that batteries, like chemical batteries that store electricity chemically, I think people know that those are increasingly important. The amazing thing about a super well insulated and air sealed home is it kind of is a battery in an interesting type of way, because it it becomes less important exactly when you are running your air conditioner or your heat pump, um, if you can kind of coast along, and that has major grid benefits. You and I know, and probably most of our listeners know, that our entire energy system is built around providing energy during peak demand, right? When everyone has everything turned on all at once, that is what we have to meet. And by building in that thermal storage into our home, by holding on to that comfort for longer and requiring less energy to provide the comfort in the first place, those peaks start to shrink. And not only do the peaks shrink, but we can sort of we can like misalign them, we can decouple them from when the peak temperature event is. When everybody's home is super inefficient, then your cooling basically has to happen at exactly the same time as your peak cooling has to basically exactly coincide with your peak outdoor temperatures. Well, that's no longer true once we start having these really super efficient homes. And so you might be able to rotate and say, okay, well, this family's home, their air conditioning is going to run and then it can cycle off. And then the next door neighbors, now theirs is going to kick on. And now those peaks just keep going down and down as we're also able to time shift because of that thermal storage, or when it's in the home, we're probably more likely to call it thermal inertia. There are also dedicated thermal storage technologies, which are a really cool area to watch, and I'm excited to see where we go with those in the residential space, where it's literally like a huge cooler that is going to store maybe ice, maybe hot rocks, and you're actually just storing a temperature differential, which has some major benefits as compared to using a chemical battery, which faces more degradation over time, stuff like that. Anyway, I'm going to cut myself off there on this one, but those are some of the like many benefits to being able to decouple when you need your equipment to run compared to when the temperature extremes are happening outside.
I think shout out to fellow systems level thinkers who really like thinking about how more efficient and clean homes also interplay with a more efficient and clean grid. And I think that's one of the cool things about Fresh Energy is we have these different teams. We have a buildings team, an electricity team, a transportation team, and increasingly there's a lot of spaces like this where they overlap. And when Eric is talking about hours of safety and how your home can be a thermal battery and kind of change how much electricity it uses and when it uses it has really big impacts on our electricity team when we're talking about peak load and distribution infrastructure. And I won't get into all that, but I think there's a lot of fun for people that are interested in climate and like thinking about systems, not only between sectors, but then also how climate change is a feedback loop affecting the sector itself. And so there's a lot of fun interplay there. I'm also excited that you brought up thermal storage. Listeners, sneak peek, we're going to be doing an explainer on thermal storage in the near future. So if that sounds at all interesting, that's going to be a fun thing to get into. Let's shift gears now. Let's talk about where do we go next? And so, what can you tell me about where Minnesota's energy code stands right now and what you're working on to advocate for more efficient, more affordable, cleaner buildings in Minnesota?
Yeah, so our current residential energy code is very overdue for an update. It is roughly equivalent to the 2009 International Energy Conservation Code, which is the that is what we use as kind of the first draft of our energy code here in Minnesota. Um, I I think I I don't want to give an exact date, but within the next few years, we are going to be moving our residential energy code to the 2024 IECC, and that is going to see a lot of energy savings. And in particular, the insulation requirements are doing a lot of that work. Um, we also, so I want to mention the commercial energy code because that is where our multifamily buildings live. And that can be a little unintuitive because obviously multifamily buildings are residences. But because of their size and scale, they do fit better in the commercial energy code. So
I didn't
that is
actually, I didn't actually know that they were considered commercial. That it makes a lot of sense for the reasons that you brought up about how they're bigger, and I never knew that though. That's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it is. These lines get divided differently in so many different spaces, and actually, in the most recent update, the Department of Labor and Industry is we're actually moving where that line is. So it used to be that small multifamily buildings could still follow the residential energy code. Um, we are now moving all of those over to the commercial energy code, and the residential energy code will only apply to single family, townhomes, and duplexes. Anything else will go in commercial energy. And the commercial energy code is a little farther away, or I mean, a little farther along. That is to say, um, it has been updated more recently and is going to be moving forward to ASHRAE 90.1, the 2025 version. Um, ASHRAE is another one of these model codes by an entity that holds a whole lot of meetings between a whole lot of experts to write that model code, which I call the first draft. So that's sort of where the actual code is right now. That's kind of on the administrative side. Department of Labor and Industry handles those updates. Um, on a bigger picture, the the at the legislature, we have supported laws that are going to require us to get to near zero before 2040. That is my shorthand. The specific requirements are for residential, it's by 2038. For commercial energy, it's actually by 2036, and it's slightly different percentages based on slightly different benchmarks. But the point is, near zero or near passive. You might also think about these as that our energy code is going to be required to get there before 2040. And I think I'm really excited to watch the continued innovation. I think when those laws passed, it was based on sort of at the time, what are the current theoretical limits of efficiency? But those limits are changing because of continued innovations and improvements. In the last few years, we have seen some cool improvements in air sealing, particularly with the ability to use aeroseal. Is you sort of spray it into the air and then you pressurize the home, and this mist of sealant just finds its way to all of the cracks and crevices that might be left in the envelope. And I would expect to see continued innovation in triple pane windows are becoming more common, and the price is coming down. They're kind of getting decoupled, I think, more and more from the luxury windows, so that it is increasingly possible to get a non-luxury tri-pane. And also, heat pumps are continuing to reach deeper and deeper into the cold, and provide more of our heating. We're seeing more development of geothermal. And since you brought up the storage, let me tell you, Isaac, one of my like nerdy, it's not even a soapbox. It's just like a thing I get really excited about is what happens when we combine residential thermal storage with the advancement in cold climate heat pumps. Because the thing that determines the efficiency and effectiveness of the heat pump, of the air source heat pump, is the outdoor temperature. Well, what if in the winter you could run your air source heat pump during the day instead of during the night? And now you're getting the efficiency of those daytime winter temperatures instead of the nighttime. So anyway, we'll have to nerd out about this offline. Um,
That sounds great. I'm excited to get into it. Listeners, like you're going to get all the details in a later blog post where Eric's going to get into this.
I love this. So, and I think, I'll wrap up this thought by saying we are continuing to advocate at the legislature in Minnesota to protect and maintain the consensus there that, our energy code is a critical piece of energy and housing affordability. We're working closely with partners at the Minnesota Efficient Builders Coalition, which we're really excited to be partnering with. It is a place to lift up, the voices of practitioners who are excited to support and promote efficiency in buildings and the policies that promote it. And all of this progress is it is really important because so to zoom out really briefly, this progress is all super important because Minnesota's building sector, the way that Minnesota Pollution Control Agency breaks down our greenhouse gas emissions by sector in Minnesota is they separate out residential and commercial buildings. And residential and commercial buildings don't make up a very large piece of the emissions pie, but they are part of the pie that is actually still increasing. So that means we have not yet turned the corner to have emissions from the building sector decreasing, right? The electricity sector, we have turned, it is still a huge piece of the pie, but the good news there is that we have rounded the corner and those emissions are now going down. Part of the
Yep.
reason this work in buildings is so important is because we still haven't bent that curve to start decreasing the emissions, and we need to do that as soon as possible. And our codes are one of the critical tools we have to do that. And along the way, as we have said, it is not only going to help with mitigating that climate pollution, but it is also, they are also helping us to adapt to a changing climate due to the emissions that have already happened. So, keeping those codes strong and up to date and enforced is is absolutely critical when we think about our changing climate.
Think, yeah, you bring up a good point where folks might not know, but Minnesota's electricity sector used to be the highest emitting sector in the state. We are now halfway decarbonized since 2005. We are burning much less coal, which is the big impact, and we've had a big increase in wind and solar and other clean electricity. And so as electricity has decreased, now transportation is actually our highest emitting sector. Buildings isn't as big now, but in the 2030s and 40s, it's going to become a larger and larger problem in Minnesota because we still have to slow this course. And when you think about homes, homes are long-lasting things. The way we construct our homes today is going to have a very big impact, not only on Minnesotans' livelihoods and wallets, but also on our emissions. And so if we're building homes much more smartly in the 2020s, we're going to have a much easier time reducing emissions in the 30s and 40s. Whereas if we aren't able to improve the code, we will be stuck with these high emitting homes for a very long time, and it will also be more costly to bring down the emissions.
Exactly. My hope is that, um, so I live in a 100-year-old home, which means that I am living every day within the decisions that, uh, that people made about this house 100 years ago. And my hope is that we can protect the energy affordability, the comfort, the safety, and the health and well-being of people 100 years from now who are going to be living inside the buildings that are based on the decisions we are making about our codes and our construction practices here and now.
I think that's an excellent place to close our podcast today. Eric, thanks so much for talking to us about building affordability.
My pleasure. Thank you, Isaac.
We have a variety of blog posts on the Fresh Energy website that we referenced today that you can read to learn more. Eric's two-part series we've been discussing today is called Efficient Homes Are Affordable Homes, parts 1 and 2. When we were talking about the Cohasset building that Sam built up north, you can read that blog post called Could This Cohasset Home Be the Future of Minnesota's Buildings? And if you'd like to learn more about building codes and all the technical things Eric was discussing in the latter half of the episode today, read our post, What's Up with Building Codes? Thank you for listening to Decarbonize the Clean Energy podcast from Fresh Energy. You can stay up to date on Fresh Energy's work at fresh-energy.org or by following us on social media like Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. Head to our website for the latest news, to make a donation, and register for upcoming events like our 2026 benefit breakfast with special guest Jesse Jenkins. Thank you to the band Palm Psalm for providing our theme song, DGAF, off their album Otuhaka. Get the latest from the band at palmpsalm.com, and thank you for listening.